I didn't even check the license plate. I just yanked open the back door, slid into the seat, dropped my cardboard box on the floor, and said, "Please just drive." Have you ever been so destroyed that you stop caring about basic safety? So numb that you'll climb into any car, any direction, as long as it's away from the place that just broke you? 5 minutes earlier, I'd been standing on the sidewalk outside the clinic where I'd given 3 years of my life, clutching a box filled with my whole career. My mug, my little plant, a framed photo of my mom, a stack of patient thank you cards, and trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. I'd just been fired. Unfairly, publicly, efficiently, like taking out the trash. Have you ever noticed the people who say it's not personal are usually the ones making it the most personal? I remember my hands shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone to order a taxi. My vision was blurry from the tears I refused to let fall. I typed in my address, hit confirmed, and stuffed the phone in my pocket before I could see the estimate on the screen. I didn't care if it was $20 or $100. I just needed to get away from that building before I started screaming. That's when a dark gray car pulled up to the curb in front of me. Right color, right shape, right time. I didn't even bend down to check the driver's face or the app. Didn't ask, "Are you here for my name?" like we're all supposed to do now. I just saw an escape hatch and jumped. I opened the back door, slid in, and slammed it shut like I was locking my whole old life out on the sidewalk. The driver glanced at me in the rear view. "Surprised," he said. Hello?" I stared straight ahead, throat tight. "Can you just give me a minute?" I managed. "Then I'll put the address in." He went quiet. The engine hummed, the air conditioner whispered. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to claw its way out. Have you ever had a moment where you know if you say one word, just one, everything holding you together is going to snap? I pressed my palms into my thighs, trying to stop them from shaking. The cardboard box at my feet dug into my ankles. I could feel the edge of my framed photo through the side of it, the glass cool against the thin cardboard. My mom's smiling face, trapped in there with my resume and a half-used pack of sticky notes, like proof that I used to be somebody useful. Before today, I was a medical assistant at a community clinic. Before today, I had health insurance, a paycheck every 2 weeks, and this quiet, stubborn pride that I was actually doing something that mattered. Before today, I was the reliable one, the single black woman in the office who never called out, never made a fuss, always stayed late to help a worried patient fill out forms. Now I was, what? Unemployed. Disposable. Another black woman they pushed out and then labeled as difficult in the file so no one else would ask questions. What would you do if after giving everything to a job, they cut you loose in a 15-minute meeting and made it sound like you should be grateful it was worse? Would you fight? Cry? Beg? Or would you do what I did? Smile tightly, sign the paper, pack your box, and walk out on legs that don't even feel like they're yours? I don't know how long we sat there in that car in silence. 10 seconds, a minute, an hour. Time didn't feel real. All I could hear were the phrases from that office looping in my head like a bad commercial. "We've noticed a pattern of negativity. You're not a good cultural fit. You can collect your final paycheck at the end of the month." Not one mention of the nights I stayed late to help patients who came in 5 minutes before closing. Not one mention of the double shifts I covered when people called out. Not one mention of the time I caught a prescription error that could have seriously harmed someone. But that's how it goes, right? One complaint instantly outweighs 100 quiet acts of care, especially when it's coming from a black woman they already decided is too much. The driver cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, are you okay?" His voice was low, careful, not nosy, not pushy, just human. I let out a sound that was supposed to be a laugh but came out jagged. "No," I said, staring at the back of his headrest. "Not even a little." He hesitated. "Do you still want to go somewhere?" I almost said no. I almost told him to let me out, that I'd walk home, that I didn't want anyone near me. But the thought of my tiny apartment with its peeling paint and stack of unpaid bills waiting on the table made my chest tighten. I needed 4 walls that didn't already know my problems, at least for a little while. "Yeah," I whispered. "Home. I'll put the address in." I fumbled for my phone, hands still shaking, and pulled up the app to check the plate number, the driver's name, the little picture. The screen loaded. A different car, a different face, a different plate. My stomach dropped. "Oh my God," I muttered. You're not my ride." He looked at me in the mirror again, then really looked this time. Warm brown eyes, a few grays at his temples, that kind of calm, expensive watch on his wrist that taxi drivers don't usually have. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "I should have introduced myself before I let you spill your whole soul in the back of my car." He paused then and gave me a small, rueful smile. "My name is Marcus. I'm not your driver." He let that sink in for a beat. "I'm the regional director. I oversee all the clinics in this network, including the one that just fired you." My world tilted all over again. Have you ever thought you were safe because you were confessing to a stranger, and then realized that stranger was the one person who could completely change the story you just told? I stared at him, my mind racing, my heart pounding loud enough that I sure he could hear it. There I was, a single, broke, freshly fired black woman, sitting in the wrong car, having just told my whole truth to the man who had the power to either crush me completely or blow this whole thing wide open. And all I could think in that suspended moment was one thing. What exactly did he just text? And who was about to be in that office in an hour?
If you had seen me yesterday, you would never have guessed I'd be the woman ugly crying in the back of a stranger's car today. Yesterday, I was Miss Reliable at the clinic, the one patients asked for by name, the one coworkers dumped extra work on because you're just so good at handling things, the one everybody trusted to fix problems she didn't even create. That's been my role my whole life. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side with my mom and my little brother. My dad left when I was 9 and never really looked back. New family, new life, same old excuses. I watched my mother work 2 jobs, come home with her feet swollen and her eyes heavy, and still manage to cook, clean, help with homework, braid my hair for school. There was never enough money, but there was always rent, always food, always lights. I learned early that if you're a black woman, you don't get the luxury of falling apart. You just keep going. When other kids talked about what they wanted to be when they grew up, I never said princess or singer or any of that. I said paid. I said out of this neighborhood. I said not tired all the time like my mom. Healthcare was my ticket out. Not the glamorous kind, no white coat, no 6-figure salary, just the steady, respectable kind. I became a medical assistant because it felt like a middle ground between my heart and my reality. I wanted to help people, but I also needed something I could get into without 10 more years of school and a mountain of extra debt. I was the first in my family to get any kind of certification beyond high school. My mom came to my little pinning ceremony in her best church dress, crying like I'd just graduated from Harvard. She kept squeezing my hand, whispering, "You did it, baby. You did it." I promised her I'd take care of us. Not in those exact words, but in the way I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, in the way I sent part of every paycheck to help with her blood pressure meds and my brother's textbooks, in the way I told everyone I'm fine, even when I was one flat tire away from Tannic. Have you ever felt like your whole worth is wrapped up in being useful? I don't remember the exact moment I became the strong one, but I do remember when I realized people had stopped asking if I needed help, at work, at home, everywhere. The clinic was supposed to be different, though. It was in a mostly black and brown neighborhood, the kind of place where people work 3 jobs and still don't have decent insurance. I loved that about it. On my first day, I watched a little grandma come in with 3 grandbabies in tow, worried sick because she couldn't afford the name brand inhaler for her youngest. The doctor was about to send her home with a shrug when I quietly pulled him aside and said, "We have a sample program. Why aren't we giving her that?" He blinked like it had never crossed his mind. We got her the inhaler. She hugged me so tight my back popped. "Thank you, baby," she said. "I knew God was going to send somebody." Moments like that, that's what kept me there the first year, when the paychecks were tight and the hours were long. I told myself, it's not perfect, but at least it matters. But even in those early days, the cracks were there. My very first performance review, my supervisor said, "Patients really like you, you're very nurturing, but sometimes you come across a little intense in meetings. Maybe soften your tone." I asked, "Can you give me an example?" She couldn't, not one, just a vague, "It's a vibe." A vibe. Have you ever noticed how a vibe is code for, "I'm uncomfortable with you, but I can't explain why, so I'm going to make it your problem"? I swallowed it. I needed that job. I told myself, just smile more, nod more, make your voice sweeter, play the game. So I did. For a while, it seemed to work. They gave me more responsibilities, training new hires, handling inventory, sometimes filling in at reception when we were short. But with every new task came the same paycheck. When I hinted at a raise, they said, "Budget is tight right now, but we appreciate you." When I asked about moving into a lead role someday, they said, "You're so valuable where you are. We'd hate to lose you from the front lines." I should have seen the pattern then. They loved my labor, not my leadership. Then the new clinic manager arrived. His name was Daniel. Early 40s, perfectly ironed shirts, MBA from somewhere he made sure we all knew about. On his first day, he gathered us in the break room and said, "We're going to modernize, streamline, bring this clinic up to the standard I'm used to." He said standard like everything we'd been doing was trash. He started with schedules, shorter appointment slots, fewer breaks, strict quotas on how many patients we needed to see per day. "We have to increase throughput," he kept saying. "This place bleeds money. We need efficiency." I tried, at first, to believe he meant well, that maybe he knew things I didn't about how clinics are supposed to run. But it didn't take long to see what his efficiency looked like in real life. Patients rushed out the door with half their questions unanswered, people told to follow up with their primary care when this clinic was the only place they could afford, lab results going uncalled because we didn't have enough staff to chase down every number. I'd look at Mrs. Johnson, who'd been coming in since before I started, and knew in my gut we were missing something. But when I brought that up, Daniel would smile that tight smile and say, "We can't handhold everyone, my name. We're running a business, not a charity." Have you ever had to stand there while someone put a price tag on human beings and then told you to smile about it? One afternoon, a little boy came in wheezing so hard he could barely talk. I could hear the air rattling in his chest from across the room. His mom looked terrified. "He's been like this all week," she said. "The pharmacy said they couldn't refill his inhaler yet. They said we were too early." His chart said he should have had enough meds. The system said everything was fine, but the way he clutched my hand told me it wasn't. I rushed him back, flagged the doctor, pushed for a breathing treatment right away. We stabilized him. Later, when things were calmer, I asked Daniel if we could review how we handle asthma cases, maybe set up a better refill reminder process. His response? "You can't handhold everyone, my name. We're running a business, not a charity." I bit my tongue. Again, I needed the job. Then came the charts. There was this quiet pressure that started creeping in. "Don't document every tiny thing," Daniel would say. "If you note every patient complaint, our liability goes up. Just stick to the main points. We're not writing novels here." Translation, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen, and if it didn't happen on paper, it can't come back on us. Every fiber of my being screamed that it was wrong. As a Black woman in healthcare, I know too well how easily our pain gets dismissed when it's not documented, how quickly stories get rewritten to make us look non-compliant or exaggerating. I wasn't going to help erase anyone's truth, but every time I pushed back, Daniel would make a note on his little pad. "You seem resistant to feedback," he'd say. "We'll have to address this in your review." I started noticing other things too, how he spoke to me versus how he spoke to my white coworkers. They'd question a process and he'd say, "Great critical thinking." I'd ask the same thing and he'd say, "You're overcomplicating it." If a white nurse raised her voice when things got hectic, she was passionate. If I did once, I was intimidating. Microaggressions so small you almost feel crazy pointing them out. Almost. But little cuts add up. When my mom's blood pressure spiked last winter and she ended up in the ER, I realized something that rattled me to my core. If she had walked into my clinic instead, under Daniel's rules, there was a good chance they would have rushed her out with a follow-up with your primary care doctor script and a pat on the arm. She could have died from efficiency. That kept me up at night. I tried to go through the proper channels. I emailed HR about patient safety concerns. I carefully avoided making it about race or bias in the first message, because Black women know the second you say that out loud, you're labeled as playing the race card. I made it about data, about near misses, about how high turnover was affecting care. The response? A 15-minute Zoom where the HR rep smiled a lot, nodded at all the right times, and ended with, "Thanks for bringing this to our attention. We'll look into it." Weeks passed. Nothing changed, except my file. I started getting written up for little things that used to be handled with a, "Hey, watch that next time." One day I forgot to log out of a computer before running to help a patient in the hallway. I'd done it 100 times in emergencies. Suddenly, it was a serious breach of protocol. Official warning. On a day when the buses were delayed, I clocked in 3 minutes late. I stayed 30 minutes after my shift to make up for it. The old manager would have high-fived me for the extra time. Daniel documented the 3 minutes and ignored the 30. It was like he was building a case against me, one petty line at a time. Have you ever felt someone quietly gathering ammunition on you, waiting for the right day to shoot? The worst part, some of my coworkers played along. Not all, some were wonderful, but there were a few who saw which way the wind was blowing and chose to side with power. A new hire, a receptionist named Kelsey, seemed especially eager to please Daniel. She'd volunteered to help with scheduling and front desk coordination, but somehow whenever a message didn't get relayed or a chart went missing, my name ended up attached to it. "I told my name," she'd say with big, innocent eyes. Maybe she forgot. She'd say it lightly, like it wasn't a big deal, but every "maybe she forgot" went into that same growing file. A couple of times I caught the look on her face when she thought I wasn't watching. I remembered overhearing her once in the break room, whispering to another coworker, "She acts like she runs the place. Maybe this will humble her." This. As in me getting knocked down. I was tired. Tired of always being the one fighting. Tired of being the unofficial case manager, social worker, and therapist for patients, then going home to be the same for my family. Tired of biting my tongue at work, because if I didn't, rent wouldn't get paid. I thought about looking for another job, I really did. On nights when the clinic's fluorescent lights were still buzzing in my skull, I'd scroll job boards until 2 a.m., eyes burning. But every entry-level posting wanted 5 years experience. Every competitive salary range was just enough to survive, not enough to exhale. And my resume? It was that clinic. Leaving felt like cutting my own parachute. Have you ever stayed in a bad situation, not because you liked it, but because the alternative looked like free fall? So I stayed. I told myself, document everything. Keep your head down. 1 more year. Save up. Then leave on your terms. That was the lie I comforted myself with, that I'd be the one to choose when I left. I didn't realize they were already choosing for me. The day everything actually cracked started like any other. I woke up to 3 notifications from my bank app, 2 automatic debits, and 1 low balance alert. My stomach knotted, but I pushed the panic down under my coffee. At least I still had a job, I told myself. At least the check was coming Friday. I put on my scrubs, the burgundy ones my favorite diabetic patient always complimented. "You look like a doctor in that color," she'd say. I smiled at the mirror, trying to see what she saw. I mostly saw dark circles and a forced cheerfulness. Then I went to work and walked straight into a storm. A patient chart was missing. Not just any chart, the file for that high blood pressure patient I'd been worried about for weeks, the one I'd flagged twice, the one I'd emailed Daniel about asking for a follow-up plan. That email was also gone from the shared folder. Funny how that works. Daniel called a huddle at the nurses' station, tapped his tablet like a judge about to pass sentence. "We had an incident," he said, eyes sweeping the room. A very important file was mishandled. This is a serious liability issue. His gaze landed on me and stayed there. My pulse quickened. "According to our records," he continued, "you were the last one to access that chart, my name. Can you explain what happened?" All eyes turned to me. Co-workers, even Kelsey from the front desk, hovering like she'd been waiting for this scene. I opened my mouth to explain how I'd seen the patient last, how I'd flagged concerns, how the system sometimes glitches. But before I could, Daniel added, "And before you answer, I want you to know HR is already aware. They've reviewed your file." That word again. File. It hit me then. This wasn't a question. This was the opening statement of a trial they'd already decided the verdict on. Have you ever stood in a room you gave everything to and realized you were suddenly the defendant? My answer that morning, my attempts to defend myself, all of that would lead to the little office, the fake plant, the motivational poster, the not a good fit. And that's how I ended up on the sidewalk with a cardboard box, too numb to think straight, climbing into the wrong car. Because when you've spent years being told you're overreacting, difficult, too sensitive, too loud, too much, the first person who leans over a seat and says, "Start from the beginning," feels like a miracle. Of course I told him everything. Of course I did. I thought he was just a taxi driver who'd forget my name when I got out. I had no idea that the stranger behind the wheel was actually the man who signed Daniel's paychecks. I had no idea my bad day was about to become a lot of people's reckoning. If you've ever been blindsided, you know your mind doesn't accept it all at once. It comes in flashes, little scenes replaying out of order, each one hitting you like a new slap. Sitting in Marcus's car after I had poured my whole history onto his upholstery, he asked one simple question that cracked the door open on the worst part of my day. "Walk me through this morning," he said, "from the moment you walked in." I swallowed. My throat felt raw, like I'd spent hours screaming even though I hadn't raised my voice once. "It was busy," I began. "Mondays always are. We were already double booked by 9. I could see it so clearly. The waiting room packed, every chair taken, people standing along the walls, the smell of hand sanitizer and cheap coffee, the murmur of voices, the steady beep of the blood pressure machine in triage. Chaos, but the kind I knew how to move through. I got there 10 minutes early, like I always did, clocked in, tied my hair back, grabbed a stack of charts from the bin. Daniel was already at the front, arms crossed, lips pressed thin, that look on his face like everything annoyed him. "We're behind," he said by way of greeting. "It's 8:59, I pointed out, scanning the names. "We open at 9. "Patients have been waiting in the parking lot since 8:15, he snapped. "We need to move faster today." Translation, today's the day he plans to make an example out of someone. "I'll do what I can," I said, biting back the urge to say, "Then maybe don't overbook." Have you ever known on some subterranean level that a day was going to go wrong even before anything specific happened? Like the air is heavier, the light is off somehow.
By 10 a.m., I'd already seen 3 walk-ins, 2 diabetics needing med refills, and a little boy with a weird rash that his mom swore just started last night, even though the skin around it told me it'd been there a week. I was at the nurse's station entering vitals when I heard Daniel say my name from behind me. His tone was too smooth. "Can I see you in my office for a second?" Every cell in my body tensed. He never asked like that. Normally it was, "When you're done with that chart, I need to talk to you," or "Quick word in the back." This was formal. I turned. He was standing there with a clipboard in his hand, HR's door already cracked open behind him like they'd been waiting. "I have 3 patients in rooms," I said, gesturing to the doors. "We'll reassign them," he cut in, smiling with his teeth but not his eyes. "This won't take long." Have you ever felt the walls closing in before you even reach the room? I followed him down the hall, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. HR, Sandy, was sitting at the small round table in Daniel's office, a manila folder in front of her. There it was, the file. The sight of that folder made my palms sweat. Daniel closed the door gently behind me. "Have a seat," he said. I sat, perching on the edge of the chair, the way you do when you're not sure if you're staying or bolting. Sandy gave me that tight, sympathetic smile HR people must practice in the mirror. "How are you doing today?" she asked. I almost laughed. "Fine," I lied. She opened the folder. Papers, lots of them, my name printed at each of them. "We wanted to talk to you about some ongoing concerns regarding your performance and behavior." Ongoing concerns. I blinked. Okay. "Over the past few months," Daniel chimed in, "we've noticed a pattern of resistance to feedback, difficulty with team dynamics, and a negative attitude that's affecting morale." Each phrase felt rehearsed, like he'd said it 100 times, to other people in other offices over other manila folders. "Can you be more specific?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. "Of course," Sandy said, flipping through the papers. "On March 3rd, you raised your voice at your supervisor when asked to adjust your documentation style." "I didn't raise my voice," I said automatically. "I asked why we're leaving out important patient details." She glanced at Daniel, then back at the paper. "On April 10th, you refused to follow instructions regarding scheduling priorities." "I asked why we were double booking a provider who was already drowning," I said. "It's unsafe. That's refusing to follow instructions now?" "Your tone was perceived as confrontational," Daniel said. Vague, slippery, always that word, perceived. "This isn't about whether you care about patients, my name. We know you do. This is about how you express that." How I express that. Translation, be quiet while we harm people. "And this morning," HR added, "we had a serious issue with the mishandling of a critical patient file." "I didn't mishandle anything. I was the one who raised concerns about that patient in the first place. I emailed you about her." I turned to Daniel. "You remember that, right? I flagged her twice." He smiled, actually smiled. He said, "We've reviewed your email usage. There's no record of that message." My stomach flipped. "What do you mean there's no record? I sent it. Maybe the system glitched. Check the backups." "We also spoke to Kelsey," he said, ignoring that. "She said she reminded you to update the chart and you brushed her off." Of course it came back to Kelsey, the woman who'd decided I needed humbling. "That's not what happened," I said, my voice finally cracking a little. "She never—" "We're not here to argue about the details," Sandy cut in gently. "We're here because, taken together, these incidents paint a picture." Have you ever watched someone paint a portrait of you with colors you don't recognize? Negativity, resistance, insubordination, unsafe behavior. By the time she was done reading their little script, I barely recognized the person on those pages. The woman they were describing was reckless, volatile, a danger to patients and staff. I thought about Mrs. Johnson and her hugs, the little boy who squeezed my hand through his breathing treatment, the grandmother who'd left a voicemail thanking me for treating me like I matter. Did those people know I was apparently a monster at work?
We've also received informal feedback from your colleagues that sometimes they feel uncomfortable approaching you. Uncomfortable how? I asked. I had to ask that. I couldn't let that just sit there like it was factual. They've described you as intense, she said carefully. Hard to talk to, that you can be, very direct. I almost laughed. So I do my job and I'm honest? I asked. That's what this is about? It's about fit, Daniel said smoothly. We have a culture here. We need team players who can adapt to change, who understand that decisions sometimes have to be made at a higher level. There it was, finally, the truth under all the pretty HR words. Shut up and do what you're told. And if those decisions are unsafe, I asked quietly, if they put patients at risk, what then? He sighed like I was exhausting. You're not clinically trained to make that call, he said. Doctors make clinical decisions. Managers handle operations. Your role is to support, not challenge. Support, not challenge. Have you ever heard in one sentence exactly how little they think of you? Sandy slid a piece of paper toward me. Given the pattern we've outlined, and after careful consideration, she said, her voice going into official mode, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Even though I'd seen the folder, even though my body had been bracing, the words still hit like a physical blow. Terminate. Immediately. You're firing me, I said, just to hear it out loud. We're ending the employment relationship, she corrected, like that made it softer. We'll pay out your remaining vacation days, you'll receive information about COBRA for your benefits, you can collect your final check. Why now? I cut in. If I've been such a problem for so long, why today? They both stiffened just a fraction. That told me everything. This morning's incident was the last straw, Daniel said. We can't overlook mishandling of critical records. We have to protect the clinic. Protect the clinic, not the patients, not the people who trusted us, the brand, the scapegoat. They were looking at me like they expected a scene, tears, yelling, begging. I could feel the weight of their anticipation like a dare. Have you ever known you were being baited and still had to fight your own rising rage? I thought about my rent, my mom's medications, my brother's text last week asking if I could help with his car insurance this month, the bills stacked on my kitchen counter. How long before things started bouncing? 2 weeks? 3? Have you ever watched your life shrink down to a handful of numbers on a screen? I ordered a taxi because walking home with that box felt too much like a walk of shame. The app said driver arriving in 3 minutes. Good, I could hold myself together for 3 more minutes. I placed the box at my feet, wrapped my arms around me against a breeze that suddenly felt colder than it was. My phone buzzed, group chat from my cousins, some stupid meme about how's everybody's Monday going? I almost typed, got fired, how about you? But I didn't. I put the phone back in my pocket. I wasn't ready to be anyone's cautionary tale yet. That's when the gray car pulled up. Right color, right general model, parked where the map said my ride would be. I didn't check the plate, didn't check the app, didn't even look at the man behind the wheel clearly. I just grabbed my box, yanked open the back door, and climbed in. And now, here I was, sitting in that same car, staring at the man who just told me he was the regional director, replaying that whole morning in my head in fast forward and slow motion at the same time. I looked at him, my heart pounding. So that's how I ended up in your back seat, I finished.
Marcus studied me for a long moment, his face unreadable. And you have documentation of any of this? He asked quietly. Some, I said. I saved copies of a few emails before they locked me out, screenshotted some of the write-ups. I have dates, names. I've been writing everything down in a notebook for months because I knew, deep down, this was coming. I thought that made me paranoid. I didn't realize it made me prepared. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's very good. Good? I repeated, stunned. I just told you I got fired.
You just told me, he corrected, that my clinic is being run in a way that could get people killed and this company sued into the ground, and that my managers have been ignoring warnings and punishing the one person who tried to fix it. He lifted his phone slightly. That text I sent? Yeah? My voice came out small. That was to my leadership team, everyone who has authority over that location. In 1 hour, they'll be in my office waiting to explain themselves. My mouth went dry. And about me, I asked. What happens to me? He held my gaze in the rearview mirror. That, he said, depends on one thing. On what? On whether you're willing, he said slowly, to walk into that room with me and tell them exactly what you just told me. My stomach twisted. Just like that, the car shrank again, the air thick with a new kind of pressure. Have you ever been offered the chance at justice and felt just as terrified as you did when you lost everything?
What do you mean, walk into that room? I asked. My voice sounded thin to my own ears, like it was coming from the other end of a tunnel. With who? Your managers, HR, the same people who just called me negative and insubordinate? Marcus didn't flinch. With all of them, he said calmly. Clinic management, HR, department heads, everyone who has touched that place. He said it like he was inviting me to a meeting, not the trial of my life. Have you ever had someone drop a door of opportunity in front of you that looks exactly like the last door they slammed in your face? My first instinct was no. Not just no, hell no. Walk back into the lion's den, but this time with a spotlight on me? Voluntarily sit across from the man who just fired me and the HR rep who smiled through it, and risk them painting me as the angry, vindictive ex-employee in front of their boss's boss? I could already hear Daniel's voice. She's just trying to get revenge. But under that fear, something else stirred. Anger. The clean kind, not the chaotic, flailing kind that wants to break everything. The kind that wants clarity. The kind that wants the truth written down somewhere it can't be deleted with one click. Why? I asked. Why would you want me there? You could just investigate on your own. Read the files, ask them questions. You don't need me. He considered that for a moment, then shook his head. Paper lies, he said. Emails disappear. People spin. I've learned that the only way to see the full picture is to put everyone in the same room and watch what happens. He glanced at me in the rear view. And because, frankly, they've been very good at making women like you disappear quietly, I don't want this to be quiet. Women like you. The phrase stung and soothed at the same time. I knew what he meant. Black, outspoken, the ones they label problematic to keep everyone else in line. You think they'll tell them the truth just because I'm there? I asked. They'll say I'm lying, that I'm bitter. They already called me negative. I don't need them to admit anything, he said. I need to see how they react when confronted with specifics, with dates, with documentation, with you. He paused. And I need you to see something too. See what? That you are not crazy, he said simply. That the way they treated you is part of a larger pattern. Sometimes the worst gaslighting isn't what they say, it's how the system responds when you speak up. I want you in that room when the system gets called to account. Have you ever had someone offer to turn your private humiliation into public accountability and felt your whole body lean forward and pull back at the same time? I imagined it for a split second. Me at one end of a conference table, Daniel and Sandy at the other, Marcus at the head. Me laying out the things I'd been writing in my little notebook at home. Dates, times, patient initials, who said what, who ignored which warning. Their faces tightening, their stories shifting, the cracks showing. But right behind that image came another. Me stumbling over my words, my voice shaking.
Them saying, see, she's emotional, she's exaggerating. My story getting twisted into something petty. Me leaving that room even more broken than when I'd left the clinic. Have you ever been so used to being dismissed that the thought of speaking up makes you feel physically ill? What happens if I say no? I asked quietly. He didn't try to guilt trip me. He didn't say, you'd be letting everyone down. He just answered the question. I'll still investigate, he said. I'll still pull records, talk to staff, review complaints. You're not responsible for fixing a system that hurt you. It's my job to clean my house. The way he said it, my house, made something in my chest unclench. He was taking ownership, not outsourcing the work to the nearest black woman with a backbone. But, he continued, it will be easier to dismiss this as miscommunication if the only voices I hear are the ones who kept their jobs. He let the silence sit between us for a moment, giving me room to think. That alone told me he was different. Daniel never let silence sit. He'd rush to fill it with whatever narrative suited him best. I stared at the back of Marcus's head, at the careful fade in his haircut, at the way his shoulders sat, relaxed but ready. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who had seen too much and was tired of cleaning up messes in the dark. Do you have any idea what you're asking? I asked finally. I just got fired. I haven't even told my mom yet. I'm sitting here with a box of my stuff in your back seat, wondering how I'm going to pay rent. And you want me to walk into a room full of people who already decided I was the problem and tell them to their faces that they're the problem? Yes, he said simply, then softer. I'm asking you to do something incredibly brave on the worst day of your professional life. And I won't lie, you could walk out of that room shaking, but you could also walk out of it knowing you didn't just let them rewrite the story. He paused. And in return, I will put my name, my position, and my authority behind what you say. I will not let them turn this into a witch hunt after you. If they retaliate, they answer to me. There it was again, that word, authority. Not the petty, local kind Daniel threw around like confetti, the kind that signs checks, that approves budgets, that can shut whole clinics down if needed. Why do you care this much? I asked. It's just one clinic, one employee. It's not just anything, he said. My mother died in a waiting room like that because staff brushed off her symptoms. They wrote anxious black woman in her chart and sent her home with antacids. She had a heart attack that night. My breath caught. I hadn't expected that. Suddenly, his calm urgency made sense in a new way. I promised myself, he continued quietly, that if I ever had any power in this system, I'd use it to make sure other people's mothers weren't treated like that. So when I hear someone describe what you just did, I don't hear difficult employee. I hear a younger version of the nurse who tried to advocate for my mom and got shut down. He glanced at me again. I can't fix what happened to you this morning. I can't return the hours of sleep you've lost over this place, but I can make sure today isn't the end of your story there, if you want that. Have you ever felt your pain suddenly connect to someone else's in a way that makes you feel less alone and more responsible at the same time? I thought of my own mother. The way her hands shook sometimes when she filled her pillbox. The way she'd say, I don't want to bother the doctor, even when something hurt, because she didn't want to be a burden. If a clinic like mine had brushed her off, would I want someone on the inside to fight for her? Yes, absolutely, without question. Had I signed up to be that person today? No, but I'd been doing it unofficially for years. The only difference now was that someone was offering to back me up. And what about my job? I asked. If I do this, are you going to rehire me? Or am I just volunteering to help get people fired while I stay unemployed? The question came out sharper than I meant it, but I needed an answer. Survival isn't a theory when you're a single woman with bills due. He nodded slowly, like he respected that I asked. That's a fair question, he said. So here's what I'll do.
If you agree to speak in that room, I'll put it in writing that your cooperation is part of an internal investigation. You'll have documented whistleblower status. If anyone retaliates against you inside this organization or in reference checks, I will personally address it, and I'll make sure compliance knows your name in the right way. He said it so plainly, like he'd had to say similar things before, like he'd seen what happens to people who stick their necks out without cover. My heart was still racing, but the panic had shifted shape. It wasn't just fear of what they could do to me anymore. It was fear of what would happen if I stayed silent again. Not just to me, to the next person they decided was too intense. To the patients whose charts would keep getting cleaned up to protect the clinic instead of them. Have you ever done this before? Dragged someone from the front lines into a room full of bosses? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Once, he said, a pharmacist who refused to override safety alerts to push a medication a doctor wanted off-label. She thought she'd get fired. Instead, we rewrote the policy and made her lead the training on it. And did everyone love her for it? I asked skeptically. He shrugged. Some did, some didn't, but she slept better at night, and the patients were safer. I looked down at my hands. My nails were chipped, cuticles ragged from nervous picking. It struck me that this was the most honest conversation I'd had with anyone at this company since I started, and it was happening in a random car I wasn't even supposed to be in. Have you ever felt like the universe shoved you into the wrong room on purpose because that's where your right next step was? I thought about going home instead, about curling up on my sagging couch, putting the box down in the corner, and letting Netflix buffer over my problems. I could call my mom, cry, say, "They fired me," and let her say all the things mothers say. "You're better than that place anyway. We'll figure it out." I could dust off my resume, start sending it into the void.
I could tell myself this was a sign to leave healthcare altogether, become a barista or a temp or a gig worker, anything where people's lives didn't hang on whether or not my manager valued compassion. I could do all that, and maybe eventually I'd be okay. But would I ever stop wondering what might have happened if I'd taken this strange, terrifying, ridiculous chance to tell the truth to the one person who might actually do something with it? You really think they'll listen? That anything will change? I asked. He said, I can't promise you perfect justice. This isn't a movie. But I can promise you they won't enjoy this meeting, and things will not stay the same afterward. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. We have 45 minutes. If you want to go home, I'll drive you there myself. No hard feelings. If you want to come to my office, we'll stop by your place first so you can grab that notebook and any documents you have. Then we walk in together. Walk in together. Not, I'll bring you in. Not, I'll use you as an example. Together. Have you ever realized that the thing you're most afraid of doing is also the only thing that makes you feel less powerless? I took a breath. It trembled, but I got it all the way in this time. On the exhale, I heard myself say, "Take me to my apartment." His shoulders relaxed just a fraction. He nodded, put the car in drive, and pulled back into traffic. "You're sure?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." We drove in silence for a minute. The city outside looked different now, not like a blur of strangers' lives, but like a map I was re-entering as a different person. "You know they're going to come for me in that room," I said. "They're going to say I was late, I was moody, I had an attitude." "And were you ever late?" he asked. "Once or twice. Buses, family emergencies, but I stayed late to make it up every time." "Were you ever moody?" he pressed. "I'm human. Some days I was tired, frustrated, but I never took it out on patients." "Did you have an attitude?" he asked, a hint of humor in his voice now. I thought about it. I had an attitude toward people cutting corners with other people's lives. If that's a crime, I'm guilty. He nodded. "Good. Don't go into that room pretending you're perfect," he said. "Go in there as yourself, flaws and all. The difference between you and them isn't that you never made mistakes. It's that when you saw problems, you tried to fix them instead of hiding them." We pulled up to my building, a faded 3-story walk-up with too many mailboxes and a perpetually broken buzzer. I suddenly saw it through his eyes and felt a flush of embarrassment. Then I caught myself. Why was I ashamed of the place I was holding together on one paycheck with no backup? That was strength, not failure. "I'll wait here," he said, putting the car in park. "Grab what you need, take 10 minutes. Text me if you change your mind." His phone buzzed again on the console. I caught a glimpse of the preview. "On my way, what's this about?" From someone named CFO.L. They were coming. The clock was ticking. I nodded, grabbed my keys, and climbed out of the car. The box of my things sat on the seat for a moment. I reached back, took the framed photo of my mom out, and tucked it under my arm. I needed her with me more than I needed my mug right now. Have you ever run upstairs to your own apartment feeling like you were sprinting towards a version of yourself that scared you? Inside, my place looked exactly like it had that morning. Unwashed dishes in the sink, mail on the counter, my scrub top draped over the chair where I'd tossed it in a rush. It felt like walking into a snapshot of my before life. I went straight to the nightstand where I kept my notebook, the cheap spiral kind. I flipped through it quickly. Pages of dates, times, notes. 3:3, told to alter chart. 4:10, scheduled double booked, patient left unseen. 5:6, Kelsey forgot to log message, blamed on me. Small handwriting, cramped margins, anger pressed into the ink. I graphed the folder where I'd stashed printed emails. Subject lines like REM, concern re BP 180-110, and documentation changes, my receipts. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Take your time, we're okay on schedule." My chest loosened just a little. Nobody had ever told me to take my time on anything at that clinic. It was always faster, quicker, more. I paused in front of the bathroom mirror on my way out. My eyes were puffy, mascara smudged, lips dry. Not exactly boardroom ready. For a second, I considered touching up my makeup, changing clothes. Then I caught my own gaze and thought, they need to see what this has done to you. I grabbed a tissue to dab the worst of the streaks, but left the rest. This is what a fired black woman looks like on her way to tell the truth. I headed back down the stairs, notebook and folder in hand, heart thudding like a drum solo. When I opened the front door, Marcus was leaning against the car, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, saw the stack in my hands, and straightened. "You're sure?" he asked one last time. I took a breath. "No," I said again, "but I'm still coming." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Good enough," he said. We got back in the car, and as we pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the direction of the clinic. It was only a few miles away, but it felt like another planet now. Have you ever realized that the distance between victim and witness is just one decision wide? Marcus drove us downtown, through streets I'd only ever walked on my days off, past glass buildings that mirrored the sky. We turned into an underground parking garage beneath a sleek office tower, the kind of place where people wear suits instead of scrubs, where decisions get made in rooms with coffee machines that cost more than my rent. My stomach flipped as the elevator doors closed behind us. The mirrored walls reflected 3 versions of me, one terrified, one furious, one strangely calm. I focused on the calm one. The elevator dinged on the 14th floor. The doors slid open to reveal a reception area straight out of a corporate brochure, neutral colors, abstract art, the quiet hum of expensive air conditioning. "You're ready?" Marcus asked, hand hovering near the small of my back, but not touching. A gentleman's instinct, restrained. "No," I said for the 3rd time. Then I straightened my shoulders. "Let's go." As we walked toward the large conference room at the end of the hall, I could see shadows moving inside through the frosted glass. Figures taking seats, a woman flipping through a folder, a man pouring coffee. Somewhere in that mix, I knew were Daniel and Sandy, oblivious to the fact that the woman they'd just pushed out onto the sidewalk was about to walk back in with backup. I tightened my grip on my notebook so hard my fingers hurt. Have you ever walked towards a door knowing that on the other side, people are about to learn you're not as easy to erase as they thought? Marcus reached for the handle, paused, and looked at me. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not here to beg for your job back. You're here to tell the truth. That's all." I nodded. Truth. I could do truth. I'd been carrying it alone for too long. He opened the door. The room went quiet as we stepped in. Heads turned, confusion flickered across faces, and then, as recognition dawned, uncomfort. They hadn't expected me. They definitely hadn't expected me to have a seat at the table. Today, I wasn't the one walking out with a box. Today, they were the ones about to be examined.
The first thing I noticed when we walked into that conference room was how many suits there were. I was used to scrubs, cardigans, cheap flats. In here, it was blazers, polished shoes, silk blouses, watches that cost more than my car. People who controlled budgets, not blood pressure cuffs. At the far end of the table sat a woman in a navy suit with lawyer written all over her posture, next to a man with a tablet and the kind of resting face that screamed CFO. Along the side were two people I recognized from occasional all-staff emails as clinical director and head of HR. And on the near side, facing them, sat Daniel and Sandy. Daniel's face, when he saw me, was almost worth the hell of that morning. His eyes widened, just a fraction, then narrowed. He shot a quick, confused look at Marcus, then back at me, as if trying to calculate what story could possibly explain my presence here. Sandy's smile froze halfway to her lips, never making it to her eyes. I saw her hand tighten on her pen. Have you ever walked into a room full of people who expected you to be gone and watched them realize you're not only still here, you have a seat at the table? Marcus didn't sit at the head of the table right away. He walked me to the empty chair next to him halfway down the long, gleaming surface and pulled it out. "Have a seat," he said quietly, loud enough for the room to hear the respect in his voice. I sat, spine straight, notebook and folder placed carefully in front of me, like armor. The lawyer cleared her throat. "Marcus, what's this about?" she asked. "You said it was urgent." He nodded once, calm. "It is," he said. "Thank you all for coming on short notice." He finally took the chair at the head. "This is my name," he said, gesturing toward me. "You all know her or know of her as a medical assistant at our East Side clinic." There was a slight stir at the mention of my title. The clinical director, Dr. Mehta, gave me a small puzzled nod. "Yes, I've seen your name on patient satisfaction reports," she said. "You get mentioned a lot." That surprised me, in a good way. I stored it away for later. "She was terminated this morning," Marcus cut in. "I happened to be parked outside when she left, and due to a misunderstanding, she entered my car believing it was her taxi." A few polite chuckles went around the room. Daniel forced a smile, trying to join in. "Yes, she was scheduled for termination today," he said smoothly. "We can provide the documentation, of course." "You will," Marcus cut in, voice like steel under velvet. "But first, she's going to tell us why she thinks she was really fired, and then we're going to compare that with what's in your files." All the air went out of the room at once. I felt every eye shift to me. My mouth went dry. For a second, all I heard was the rush of blood in my ears. This was the moment my fear had been screaming about since he'd first suggested this. Open your mouth and you could ruin your life. Stay quiet and you'll let them rewrite it. Have you ever had to choose between your comfort and your conscience in front of an audience? Marcus must have seen the panic flicker across my face because he gave me the slightest nod. Not a push, a permission. I opened my notebook. "My name is my name," I began. My voice shook on the first word, but I kept going. "I started at the East Side Clinic 3 years ago when it first opened its expansion wing. Until this morning, I'd never been formally disciplined for anything beyond a single tardy in my first month." I looked up. Everything changed when Daniel became manager last year. Daniel shifted in his seat. "With respect," he said quickly, "this seems like a very one-sided story." "You'll have a chance to respond," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off me. "Let her speak." The lawyer folded her hands, studying me. The CFO tapped something into his tablet. I took another breath. As I talked, something strange happened. The trembling in my hands didn't go away, but it stopped controlling me. My fear didn't leave, but it moved to the back row and let my memory step to the front. I laid it out. Dates.
The March 3rd raised voice incident where I'd questioned altered documentation, the April 10th schedule overload, my objection to double booking, and my negativity note attached afterward. The exact phrasing Daniel had used, "You're not clinically trained to make that call." I read directly from my notebook, my own handwriting backing me up. On March 3rd, Daniel told me, quote, "We can't write down every little complaint. It creates liability. Just stick to the main issues." 2 days later, a patient's chest pain wasn't documented because it was considered non-specific, and then she ended up in the ER with a heart attack. I saw Dr. Mehta's jaw clench at that. I talked about the asthma kid, about the blood pressure lady I'd emailed about. I sent an email on April 22nd at 9:43 p.m. from my work address to Daniel and CC'd it to Esney. Subject, concern re BP 180-110 patient follow-up. I printed it when I started fearing it might disappear. I slid the printed email across the table to Marcus and the lawyer. But this morning, in my termination meeting, I was told there was no record of that message. The lawyer's eyebrows lifted slightly as she read. "This is specific," she murmured. "Daniel, did you receive this?" All eyes swung to him. He licked his lips, buying time. "I get a lot of emails," he said. "I don't recall that one in particular. It might have been misfiled, or maybe she meant to save it as a draft and never sent." "It's addressed to you and CC'd to HR," I said. "It has your canned signature at the bottom of your reply." I slid a second page forward. His one-line response. "Noted. Will address in next staff meeting. Dan." Silence. Behind me, I thought I heard someone let out a low, involuntary whistle. The CFO's typing paused. Marcus's face didn't change much, but I could see the faint muscle twitch in his cheek. Have you ever watched someone try to wriggle out of a net you helped weave? I kept going. I described Kelsey's forgotten messages, how every lost note seemed to stick to my name, the sudden flurry of petty write-ups after I filed an HR complaint about unsafe practices, how my concerns were reframed as negativity and disruptive to morale. When I raised issues privately, I said, I was told I was overreacting. When I raised them in meetings, I was told I had a tone. My advocacy for patients was repeatedly labeled as insubordination. My voice cracked on that last word. I didn't try to hide it. I looked at Sandy. In your office this morning, you said my colleagues found me intimidating and hard to approach. You told me others had complained. I'd like to know who and what exactly they said. Sandy's fingers tightened on her pen. We don't disclose the names of employees who give feedback, she said. That would be inappropriate. But you weaponize their feedback to justify my termination without giving me any chance to address it with them. How is that appropriate? The head of HR, a woman I'd never met before today, turned slowly toward Sandy. Did she submit any formal complaints to HR about clinic operations? Sandy's face flushed. We had a conversation, she said vaguely. She expressed some frustrations. I didn't feel it rose to the level of a formal complaint. I have the email where I specifically wrote I'd like to open a formal complaint about unsafe practices and retaliation concerns, I said, sliding yet another printed page forward. The new HR head read it, then looked at Sandy. Why is there no record of this in our system? She asked quietly. Sandy stammered. I was going to enter it after I'd spoken to Daniel, but things got busy, and you had time to help process her termination, but not her complaint, Marcus said, in still that too calm voice that meant he was furious. The room felt hotter suddenly. The clinical director spoke up. I've received anonymous concerns from that clinic about rushed visits and pressure around documentation, she said slowly. I forwarded them to local leadership to handle. I wasn't aware a named staff member had echoed those concerns and been terminated afterwards. She looked at me. Why didn't you come to my office? Respectfully, I said, most of us don't even know where your office is. We see your name on PowerPoints once every quarter. We're told to go through our manager and HR. Have you ever watched people at the top realize how broken their open door policy really is? I expected Daniel to stay quiet, but he couldn't. Men like him rarely can. With all due respect, he said tightly, we're hearing one very emotional side of the story. My name has always been passionate, but that doesn't change the fact that she's struggled with professionalism. She's late, she snaps at colleagues, she undermines my authority in front of other staff. We can't run an efficient clinic if one employee refuses to get on board. This is starting to sound less like an investigation and more like a personal attack. There it was. The shift. He was going to make this about my feelings, my flaws, my alleged temper. I felt my throat tighten, the old panic rising. Here we go again. They listened just long enough to find a way to make it your fault. Marcus turned to me. Were you ever late? I asked. I met his eyes. Yes, I said. I refused to lie. A handful of times in 3 years. I always stayed late to cover the time and then some. Did you ever speak sharply to a coworker? Yes, I said again. I'm not a robot. There were days I was exhausted and frustrated, but I never disrespected anyone in front of patients. Did you undermine Daniel's authority? I considered that. If undermine means I questioned decisions that I believed put patients at risk, then yes. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's. He turned back to the others. So, we have a human being who sometimes runs late and sometimes speaks sharply when she's trying to keep people safe. And we have a manager who ignored safety concerns, failed to escalate them to HR properly, and terminated the employee who raised them. He looked at the lawyer. Which one presents a bigger liability to this organization? She didn't smile. Lawyers rarely do, but her head tilted a fraction toward.
From a risk perspective, she said, retaliation against a whistleblower is significantly more dangerous than an occasionally tardy employee with good documentation. Daniel's jaw clenched. You're taking her word over mine? He demanded. Over my years of experience? The CFO spoke for the first time. We're taking the documentation over everyone's word, he said flatly, and so far, her documentation is what exists. I could have tissed him in that moment. Have you ever felt the balance of power in a room physically shift, like gravity tilted just a few degrees in your favor? Marcus leaned back slightly. I'd like to hear from others, he said. Dr. Mehta, you mentioned satisfaction surveys. Any trends involving Eastside? She tapped at her tablet. Consistently high marks for individual staff interactions, especially for my name, but there's an uptick in comments over the last 6 months about feeling rushed, not having questions answered, not being taken seriously. Most of them mention new management as the reason. Her eyes flicked to Daniel. I raised those with you in our last monthly review, she said. You said you were addressing them. We've been short-staffed, like every clinic. I can't control that. And you told me to increase efficiency without compromising care. I told you to increase efficiency without compromising care, she corrected. There's a difference. The new head of HR cleared her throat. Sandy, she said, you characterized this termination to me this morning as a clean case with ample documentation. You did not mention an outstanding complaint about safety or that the employee in question had raised concerns that were never logged. Why? Sandy's mask was cracking. I could see sweat beading at her temples. I didn't think it was directly related, she said weakly. Her complaint was about feeling undervalued. Read the email again, the HR head said. The lawyer slid it back to her. Sandy's eyes flickered over the lines, her lips moving silently. Missed labs, she read. Patients sent home without follow-up. Pressure to alter documentation. And a note at the end about feeling targeted since raising concerns. How, the HR head asked, is that not directly related to a termination decision 2 weeks later? Silence again. Have you ever watched people who are used to being invisible in the consequences suddenly become very, very visible? For a moment, no one spoke. The air conditioner hummed, the city buzzed beyond the glass. Inside, the only sound was the soft rustle of papers and Daniel's quickened breathing. Then, from the far end of the table, a timid voice spoke. I turned and saw Miguel standing awkwardly near the door. I hadn't even noticed him slip in.
He must have been called up from the clinic. He said, clearing his throat. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here, but Mr. Davis, he nodded toward Marcus, asked if anyone else from East Side wanted to share. Marcus gestured him in. Please, he said, have a seat. Miguel shook his head. I'll stand, he said softly. His eyes flicked to me for the briefest second, apology and fear tangled together. I wanted to say, what she's saying, it's true. All of it. My heart lodged in my throat. He went on, words tumbling out faster as the dam broke. He talked about double-booked schedules, about being told to just put 120/80 on charts if the actual numbers were a little high, but not crazy. About Daniel telling them, if we document every little thing, we'll never get through the day. He looked at Sandy. I told you I was uncomfortable with that, he said. You said we had to trust management. Her eyes dropped to the table. And Maya, he glanced at me again. Yeah, she speaks up, but it's never for herself. It's always for the patients. And every time she did, Daniel would roll his eyes after she left and say, she thinks she's in charge. He said she was replaceable. The word burned. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing it out loud still hurt. Do any other staff share these concerns? The CFO asked. Miguel nodded vigorously. People are scared to say anything, he said, especially since they saw what happened to her. We all got the message. Keep your head down or you're next. Keep your head down or you're next. Have you ever realized that your firing wasn't just about you? It was a warning shot to everybody else. Marcus nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected. Thank you, Miguel, he said. You can wait outside now. We might need you again. Miguel nodded, shot me one more apologetic look, and slipped out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Marcus folded his hands on the table. Here's what I'm hearing, he said. We have a manager who has prioritized metrics over care, an HR representative who failed to properly log or escalate serious complaints, and a clinic culture where staff fear retaliation for speaking up. We have at least one termination that appears to have been, at minimum, tainted by that retaliation. He looked at Daniel and Sandy one by one. Do either of you have anything you'd like to say before I make my recommendations? Daniel's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're going to tank a whole clinic because one emotional employee and a nervous assistant are throwing us under the bus? We're under impossible pressure here. Do you have any idea what it's like on the ground? We don't have enough staff, enough support, enough... You had enough support to build a case file on the one person who kept pointing out problems, I said before I could stop myself. You see... he said, gesturing toward me. This is what I'm talking about. Disrespectful, undermining. This is exactly why she had to go. No, Marcus said quietly. She had to go because you couldn't stand being questioned. There's a difference. He turned to Sandy. And you? He asked. She looked down at her hands. I thought I was doing my job, she whispered. I thought if I could just handle it at the clinic level, it wouldn't have to become a big deal. We're stretched so thin in HR, and... Her voice trailed off under the weight of everyone's stare. She swallowed. I should have logged her complaint, she finished, barely audible. Have you ever watched someone realize in real time that I was just following orders isn't going to save them this time? Marcus sat back. The quiet in the room turned from awkward to expectant. What would he do? Would he talk about action plans and coaching opportunities? The corporate words mean, we'll send an email and then move on. Or would he actually swing the hammer? He chose the hammer. Effective immediately, he said, his voice steady. Daniel, you are relieved of your duties as clinic manager pending a full investigation. You will be placed on administrative leave. Daniel's face went slack. You're suspending me? He sputtered. I'm protecting patients and this organization. Until we know exactly how deep this goes, I can't in good conscience leave you in charge over there. He turned to Sandy. You are also placed on leave, not because you made one mistake, but because your handling of this shows a fundamental misunderstanding of your role. HR is not here to shield management from consequences. It's here to protect the integrity of the workplace. Her eyes filled with tears. For a blink, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Have you ever seen the people who used your file against you suddenly find themselves with one of their own? Marcus continued. Dr. Mehta, I want a third-party clinical audit of East Side's records over the past year. Random sample of charts, focus on documentation practices and follow-up protocols. CFO, I want a billing review. We're not just talking about ethics here. We might be talking about fraud if codes were manipulated. Both nodded, already making notes. HR, he said to the department head, I want a confidential channel set up today for staff at all clinics to report concerns directly to your office, bypassing local managers, anonymous if they choose. And I want communication out by tomorrow that retaliation will not be tolerated and will be investigated at my level. He finally turned to me. My heart hammered. I had no idea what was coming. As for you, Maya, he began, have you ever felt your entire future hang on the next sentence out of someone's mouth? Your termination is hereby rescinded, he said, effective immediately. As of right now, you are an employee in good standing, placed on paid administrative leave while we sort this out. I blinked. What? My brain struggled to keep up. This morning I'd been walked out like a criminal. Now I was, what? Unfired? You will not return to the East Side Clinic during this process, Marcus continued. I won't put you back in that environment, but you will be compensated as if you were still working full-time. The CFO nodded. We'll adjust payroll, he said, already tapping on his tablet. Back pay, if necessary. I felt lightheaded. Paid leave. The two words together sounded like a foreign language. I opened my mouth, closed it. I started, then trailed off. Thank you, I managed. He wasn't finished. Once the investigation is complete, he said, we'll discuss where you want to go from there. There are roles in compliance and patient advocacy where your, attitude would be extremely valuable. A few people actually chuckled at that. Not mocking, almost approving? Daniel looked like he might explode. You're rewarding her for insubordination? He said through clenched teeth. I'm correcting for the fact that we punished the wrong person, Marcus replied without looking at him. If that feels like punishment to you, you might want to examine why. Have you ever watched someone lose the one thing they thought gave them power, control over other people's stories? Marcus looked around the table, letting his gaze rest on each face. This is not about one bad manager, he said. It's about a culture that allowed him to operate this way without anyone above him noticing or intervening. That's on all of us, including me. That admission caught me off guard. Leaders rarely say me when things go wrong. It's always them. We're going to fix it, he said, and we're going to use what happened to Maya as a case study in what never to do again. He turned to me one last time. You are under no obligation to continue helping us after today, but if you choose to, I'd like you to be part of those conversations. Your perspective is clearly something we've been missing at these tables. Being invited to the table sounds poetic when people post about it online. Sitting there in real life, fresh from being thrown out the back door of the same organization, it felt surreal, heavy, terrifying, and right. I swallowed. I'll think about it, I said. It was all I could promise in that moment. That's all I ask, he replied. The meeting began to dissolve after that into logistics, timelines, interim leadership, next steps. People shuffled papers, whispered to each other, already scheming what this meant for their fiefdoms. But under all the corporate buzz, one fact hummed like a live wire. I came in here as the problem. They were leaving as the ones with explaining to do. Have you ever sat in a room and realized in real time that the story that was supposed to crush you has just been flipped inside out? As we stood to leave, the lawyer approached me quietly. If you're open to it, she said, pressing a card in my hand, I'd like to connect you with our external consultants. They specialize in building safer reporting systems. Your input would be invaluable. Invaluable. I had been called a lot of things this morning. Invaluable was not one of them. McGill was waiting in the hallway when I stepped out, hovering by the water cooler like a nervous kid waiting outside the principal's office. "How'd it go?" he whispered. I exhaled, a shaky laugh bubbling out. "Well, let's just say you might have a new manager soon," I said. His eyes widened. Then he grinned. "Good," he said fiercely. He was killing us. He sobered. "You okay?" A few hours ago, that question would have undone me. Now, surprisingly, I could answer it without lying. "Not yet," I said, "but I think I will be." Marcus caught up to us. "I can have someone drive you home, or you can sit with HR to go over your reinstatement paperwork now. Up to you." For the first time all day, I realized I had options, choices, not just reactions. "Home," I said. "I need to call my mother before she hears about this from the Auntie network." He smiled. "Fair enough." As we rode the elevator down, I leaned back against the cool metal and closed my eyes. Images flashed. The tiny office where they'd fired me, the sidewalk outside the clinic, the back seat of his car, this conference room with its polished table. Me and all of them, different and the same. Have you ever felt your life split into before and after and known exactly which elevator ride carried you across the line? When we stepped out into the parking garage, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but less suffocating. Marcus opened the car door for me again, like we were rewinding to the moment I'd first gotten in. Except nothing about me was the same now. I slid into the back seat, my cardboard box still there where we'd left it, my mug peeking over the edge, my plant a little squashed but alive. I picked up the framed photo of my mom, ran my thumb over the glass. "You did good today," Marcus said quietly, leaning in the open door. I looked up at him. "I didn't do it alone," I said. "You did the hardest part. You told the truth when it would have been easier to disappear." He closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side. As the engine started and we pulled out into the daylight, I watched the office tower recede in the rearview mirror. Somewhere in the 14th floor, people were already calling each other, drafting memos, spinning stories. The machine was grinding, processing this new data point. Me. But for the first time, I wasn't just something to be processed. I was a variable they had to consider. I was a record they couldn't quietly delete. Have you ever realized that the text someone else sent, "Everyone in my office, 1 hour, no exceptions," was really the message your own life had been sending you for years? Everyone in the office of your mind, your fear, your pride, your exhaustion, your intuition. 1 hour, no exceptions. Sit them all down and listen. In that conference room, under fluorescent lights and judgmental stares, I'd finally listened to the one voice I'd spent years shoving to the back. My own. And that, more than Daniel's suspension, more than my reinstatement, was the real turning point. Because once you hear yourself like that, really hear yourself, you can't unknow the sound. In the next weeks, the investigation would unfold. Offers would be made. Choices would be put in front of me again. But sitting in that car, headed home with paid leave and a story that no longer ended in that little HR office, I knew one thing with absolute, bone-deep certainty. Whatever came next, I was never going back to being the woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace. After that meeting, my brain refused to believe any of it was real. Every time I glanced at the terminated email from that morning and then the new employment status updated message HR sent that afternoon, my mind short-circuited. It was like looking at two different versions of my life laid side by side. In one, I was the negative employee escorted out with a box. In the other, I was a paid staff member on leave with an invitation to help fix the system that tried to spit me out. Have you ever had such a left turn in your story that your emotions keep running in the old direction for a while? I went home and did what any grown Black woman does when the world has tried to humiliate her in one day. I called my mother. "Hey, baby," she answered, like she always does. "You off early?" I sat on my couch, cardboard box in front of me, my framed photo of her leaning against its side as if she was staring back at herself. "Mama, you sitting down?" She went quiet instantly. "What happened?" I took a breath. "I told her that they fired me," I said. I heard her inhale sharply. "What? Why? What did they—" "It's a long story," I said, and then, because I needed to hear the whole thing out loud again, I gave it to her. The write-ups, the complaints, the missing email, the termination meeting, the stranger's car that wasn't a taxi, Marcus's text, everyone in my office, 1 hour, no exceptions. The conference room, Daniel's suspension, my unfiring. I braced myself for her to say, "What did you do?" Or maybe you could have handled it differently. Years of conditioning will do that. You start expecting people to find your part in the blame. But my mother just listened, really listened. I could picture her on the other end, one hand on her hip, the other pressed to her chest. She exhaled when I finished. "Do you see?" she said quietly. "Do you see why I always told you to document everything? Why I told you to speak up even when they try to make you feel crazy? You also told me to keep my head down and keep my job," I reminded her softly. "I told you to survive," she corrected. "But baby, surviving and shrinking are not the same thing. You didn't shrink today." Her voice grew fierce. "They tried to do to you what so many places did to me. Use your skills, chew you up, then toss you when you started asking questions. But you didn't go out the back door crying. You walked into the front door of the people who signed their checks. That's not failure. That's power." Have you ever needed someone who's been through their own fire to point out that you're not just burned, you're refined? I still cried, of course, because even with the reinstatement, the investigation, the possibilities, loss is loss. I'd lost whatever innocent belief I had left in if you just work hard, you'll be safe. I'd lost colleagues I thought I trusted. I'd lost the illusion that my job was solid ground instead of thin ice. My mom let me cry, let me get it all out. Then she said, "You know what I'm most proud of?" "That I didn't cuss anybody out?" I sniffed. "That too," she chuckled, "but mostly that you didn't let them turn you into what they said you were. They called you negative. You could have given them negative. Instead, you gave them the truth." The Auntie Network did its thing after that, of course. Word travels fast in our community. Some people texted, "Girl, I heard something went down at that clinic." Others called saying, "My cousin works in billing. She said your name came up in a big meeting." I kept my explanations simple. There were issues. I spoke up. They tried to get rid of me. It didn't stick. Have you ever watched gossip transform from something you fear into something you don't need to run from anymore? Over the next few weeks, HR sent me updates. The investigation confirmed what we'd suspected and revealed things we hadn't. It wasn't just me and Miguel. Multiple staff, once they saw Daniel and Sandy were on leave, came forward with their own stories, being told to fudge times, to lose certain complaints, to prioritize good-paying patients over Medicaid ones. Daniel's efficiency had been quietly eroding care in 100 small ways. East Side got an interim manager, someone from another clinic with a reputation for actually listening to staff. Sandy resigned to pursue other opportunities after the internal report. Official statement. Unofficially, I heard she'd been given the choice, step down or be fired. She chose the door. My phone lit up with texts from old coworkers I hadn't heard from in weeks. We're having normal length appointments again. New manager asked us what we needed for once. It feels lighter here. Thank you. Those two words kept appearing. Thank you. Thank you for what? For getting fired? For taking a wrong taxi? But I knew what they meant. Thank you for not swallowing it. Thank you for not just disappearing quietly so the rest of us could keep pretending this was okay. Have you ever realized your personal nightmare was someone else's lifeline? During that time, I also did something I'd been putting off for years. I started therapy. I told the therapist the same story I'd told Marcus and my mom, but this time the focus wasn't on what they did, it was on what I'd learned to tolerate. I heard myself say things like, I didn't want to be seen as difficult, or I thought if I just worked harder, they'd see my value, or I was afraid to complain because I need the money. She didn't judge me. She just asked, where did you learn that your safety at work depends on never making anyone uncomfortable? Have you ever had a question land so deep you feel it behind your ribs? We unpacked a lot in those sessions, about being the eldest daughter, about being the only Black woman in some rooms, and one of many in others, but still somehow always the one expected to carry everything, about the strong Black woman myth, and how it tricks us into thinking strength means endurance, not discernment. I realized I'd spent years proving I could handle anything work through at me, and very little time asking if I should have to. When Marcus called 3 weeks later to talk about next steps, I was a slightly different woman than the one who'd climbed into his car by mistake. He invited me back to the office, but this time not for a surprise tribunal. This time it was just him, the new head of HR, and Dr. Mehta in a smaller meeting room with a window view of the city. We've completed the initial investigation, Dr. Mehta said. There will be ongoing changes at Eastside and across all clinics. Your testimony was a major catalyst for that. We are grateful. Her choice of word mattered to me. Not just, we appreciate you venting, grateful. We also wanted to talk about your role, Marcus added. You're still on paid leave, but that's not a permanent state. I braced myself. Here it comes, the thank you now run along speech. Old fear is hard to evict. But instead, he slid a printed document across the table, a job description. Patient Safety and Advocacy Coordinator, I read. We're creating it, he said, with you in mind. It's not just for East Side. It would be system-wide. Someone who reviews complaints, monitors patterns, checks documentation trends, and most importantly, makes sure voices like yours actually make it to leadership before things blow up. My heart thumped. Do you want me to be the person I needed? I asked. Exactly, he said. We need someone who understands both sides, the chaos on the ground and the blind spots up here. The HR head chimed in. It comes with a raise, better hours, benefits, she said. You wouldn't be on the front desk or triaging anymore. You'd be between the clinics and us. A bridge. A bridge. Have you ever been so used to being walked on that the idea of being a bridge, chosen, built, intentional, feels radical? I won't pretend I jumped at it at first. Part of me missed the direct patient contact, the little kids, the grandmothers, the teenagers who only trusted me with their real symptoms. Part of me worried I'd become management, removed from the front lines. But another part of me, the part that had watched Daniel manipulate charts and schedules with impunity, saw the power in that role. I could be the person who says, no, we're not altering that, and have it stick. I asked a time to think. They gave it. And here's important. I didn't just ask for time because I was unsure about the job. I asked because I wanted to check in with myself first, not them. Old me would have said yes to anything that sounded like stability. New me wanted alignment. I talked to my therapist, to my mother, to Miguel, who now texted me updates like, we got a new BP machine. They're actually fixing stuff. Even went back to the East Side Clinic once, not as staff, not as patient, just to sit in the parking lot in my car and watch people go in and out. The place looked the same, but the energy felt different. Or maybe I did. I thought about the little girl who'd once told me she wanted to be a nurse like you so I can help people. What would I tell her? Go work where they burn you out and then throw you away? Or get as much power as you can so you can change how these places work? In the end, I said yes. The first day in my new role, I walked into a different building. Same organization, different energy. People introduced themselves using titles like director and VP, but this time, I wasn't the only brown face in the room. This time, I wasn't the only one asking, how will this affect patients? I had a badge again, but this one didn't just say medical assistant. It said patient safety and advocacy. That word on my chest meant something. I sat in on case reviews where near misses were discussed honestly instead of swept under the rug. I helped draft new policies that made it harder for managers to retaliate without a paper trail. I trained staff on how to document concerns, and I made sure my own story was part of the training, stripped of names, but not of truth. Have you ever watched your worst day become a teaching tool to prevent someone else's? Not everyone loved it. Some clinic managers were annoyed. Now we have more paperwork, more eyes on us. But some were relieved. Finally, one nurse supervisor told me after a workshop, we have something to point to when we say, this isn't safe. Thank you for taking the hit so the rest of us don't have to. Taking the hit. That's how it felt at first, like I had stepped in front of a bullet. But slowly, that language shifted in my own mind. I hadn't just taken a hit, I'd drawn a line. I bumped into Kelsey once, months later, at a training session. She'd been transferred to another clinic. When she saw me at the front of the room, her face went through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Shock, discomfort, maybe shame. She avoided eye contact all session. As people filed out, she hovered near the door, then approached me with hesitant steps. I didn't know it was going to get like that, she said quietly. With you. With Daniel. I wanted to keep my job. Her voice shook. She was younger than me. Maybe this had been her first real job. Today, I had more compassion to spare than the day they fired me. Wanting to keep your job doesn't make you a bad person, but throwing someone else under the bus to do it? That's a choice. She nodded, eyes wet. I'm sorry, she whispered. I believed her. That didn't erase what happened, but it mattered. We're all surviving systems that reward silence. Some of us rebel. Some of us adapt. Sometimes we do both at different times of our lives. Do better where you are now, I said. When you see something wrong, remember how this felt. Don't be silent next time. She nodded, again. I won't, she said. Have you ever forgiven someone not because they deserve it, but because you refuse to let their worst decision keep taking up space in your head? There were still hard days in the new role, reading complaint after complaint, hearing story after story of people being dismissed and disrespected will weigh on you. Sometimes I'd go home and sit in the shower just letting the water hit me, feeling the heaviness in my chest. But there was a difference now. I wasn't alone with the weight. I had colleagues who also cared, systems we were slowly, painfully strengthening, a boss who'd accidentally become my ally because I'd stepped into his car thinking it was a taxi. One afternoon, a few months in, I ended up back in Marcus's car, not as a passenger spilling my guts, but as a colleague catching a ride back from a site visit. We sat in a bit of traffic, the city crawling by outside the windows. He glanced at me in the mirror. You settling in okay? He asked. Still waiting for someone to tell me this was all a prank, I said. But yeah, I am. I hesitated, then said, Can I ask you something? Of course. If I hadn't gotten into your car that day, what do you think would have happened? He considered it. Eventually, something at that clinic would have forced our attention. A lawsuit, a bad outcome, a story in the news. We were already getting hints, but it might have taken longer. And you? You probably would have moved on to another job, carrying the story that you were the problem. That's the part that bothers me most. He glanced back at me. We can't control every bad manager, but we can control what we do when the truth lands in our lap. That day, it just so happened to land in my back seat. We drove in silence for a moment, letting that sit. Do you ever feel bad that it took you accidentally overhearing it for you to act? That all the emails and surveys didn't get you there, but me crying in your car did? He didn't get defensive. Yeah, he said, I do. It's a reminder that our systems for hearing people aren't as strong as they need to be. We shouldn't require a breakdown in a parking lot for someone's pain to count. He glanced at me again. That's why your job exists now, to make sure we hear things before they explode. Have you ever realized you're not just a survivor of a broken system? You're now part of building a better one. Sometimes, when I tell this story, people focus on the lucky of it. You're so lucky, they say. You got into the right car. Most people don't. They're right. It was luck that the car I climbed into by mistake belonged to someone with power and a conscience. It was luck that I had documentation. It was luck that Miguel found his voice that day. But it wasn't luck that I spoke up. It wasn't luck that I took notes even when I felt silly. It wasn't luck that when Marcus offered me that terrifying choice, go home or go to my office, I said, take me to my apartment. I need my notebook. Luck opened the door. Most of what happened after were choices. Have you ever given yourself credit for the choices you made after life threw something wild at you? Here's what I know now that I didn't fully know sitting on that curb with my box. Your job can be taken. Your reputation can be twisted. Your file can be edited. But your voice, the story you tell yourself about what happened to you, that's yours to guard or give away. For a long time, I'd been giving that story away, letting other people define me as difficult, negative, too much, letting institutions convince me that survival required silence. That day in Marcus's car, when he sent that text, everyone in my office, 1 hour, no exceptions, it shook more than a clinic. It shook me. No more exceptions. Every part of me that had been making excuses for their behavior, for my own shrinking, had to show up and answer questions. Why did you stay? Why did you stop trusting yourself? Why did you think you owed them their silence more than you owed your patients your honesty? The answers weren't pretty, but they were mine. And that's what I want you to hear if you've made it this far into my story. Not every stranger's car will lead to a boardroom. Not every unjust firing will end in reinstatement and a promotion. There is no fairy tale guarantee here. But your moment might come in a different form. A boss making an inappropriate joke in a meeting. A coworker forgetting your contributions on a project. A doctor dismissing your pain, or your mother's, or your child's. A text, an email. A chance to say no. This isn't right. When that moment comes, your fear will show up first. She's fast. She'll tell you to keep your head down, keep the job, keep the peace. She's not wrong about the risks, but there's another voice, slower, quieter, that you have to lean in to hear. The one that says, what about the cost of staying silent? What about the next person this will happen to? I can't tell you what to do in your moment. I don't know your bills, your family, your support system. I only know this. The day I chose my voice over my comfort, my whole life started to rearrange around that decision. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was scary. Yes, I cried in the back of a stranger's car like my world had ended. But that day didn't end my world. It ended a version of me that believed safety meant being small. I entered a stranger's car thinking he was my taxi. I told him I was fired. His text changed my life. But the real change started the second I decided to let that text pull me into a room I never imagined I had the right to be in. If my story does anything for you, I hope it does this. Not make you wait for a miracle ride, but make you a little less willing to ride along quietly in places where your spirit knows you don't belong.
A year later, I still flinch a little every time I open the back door of a car. Old instincts die hard. But now, instead of just checking the license plate and the driver's face, I check in with something deeper, that voice I ignored for too long. Have you ever looked back at the worst day of your life and realized it was also the day you finally met yourself for real? I didn't notice the shift all at once. It showed up in small ways. First, in how I went back to the East Side Clinic, not as staff, but as the new patient safety and advocacy coordinator, scheduled for a site visit. Walking through those doors again, my stomach twisted, expecting shame to wash over me. Instead, I felt taller. People looked up from their desks, from exam rooms, from the waiting area. Some gave me quick nods. Some smiled. A few pulled me aside in whispers. "It's different now," one nurse said, eyes shining. "We actually have time to talk to people again." "They ask us before they change things," another added. "They keep using your story in training. You're like a legend." Legend. I used to be the cautionary tale. Now I was the origin story of new policies. Same woman, different narrative. I met Miguel behind the nurse's station, updating a chart with the focus and calm I hadn't seen in him before. He grinned when he saw me. "Hey, boss," he joked. "Don't start," I said, laughing. "I'm not your boss. I'm your annoying big sister who reads all your charts now." "Better you than him," he murmured, nodding toward the manager's office. New manager, glass door, open blinds, no raised voices floating out. I met the new clinic manager. She shook my hand firmly and said, "I've heard a lot about you. I want you to tell me if we slip back into old habits." Imagine that, a manager asking to be held accountable. When I left that day, I sat in my car for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, letting it sink in. I hadn't come back as the girl who'd been walked out with a box. I'd come back as someone who'd helped change the air in that place. Have you ever revisited the scene of your trauma and realized it no longer owns you? Work wasn't the only place that changed. My relationships did too. Before, I used to joke that I was everybody's emergency contact and nobody's first call for brunch. People leaned on me, but they didn't always see me. I had built a whole personality around being the one who had it together, the one who'd pick you up at 3 a.m., the one you could vent to about your messy life while I never talked about mine. After the firing, and everything that followed, I didn't have the energy to keep up that act. I started saying things like, "I can't talk right now, I'm overwhelmed," or "I need you to just listen, not fix." And the wildest thing happened. The right people adjusted. The wrong ones drifted away. My circle got smaller and more honest. My best friend still teases me that I went corporate, but she's the one who reminds me to take my PTO. My brother, who used to call only when he needed money, started calling just to check in. "You good, sis?" he asks, and sometimes I say, "No," and he stays on the phone anyway. Have you ever noticed that when you stop performing strength, the people who really love you step in closer instead of running away? Even my sense of what I deserved in love shifted. For a while after everything, I swore off dating completely. Every man looked like a walking red flag. Every WYD text felt like a test I refused to take. I poured myself into work, therapy, my mom, my own rest. Eventually, though, life being life, somebody slipped past my defenses. Not in a dramatic way, movie way, just a man I kept seeing at the same coffee shop where I escaped to write reports. Dark skin, kind eyes, a laugh that made everyone at the next table smile too. He struck up conversation one day. About nothing, really. The weather, the line, my laptop stickers. Over a few weeks, it turned into something. We exchanged numbers, texted, went for a walk instead of just talking between coffee refills. The first time he said, "Can I call you later?" I felt my chest tighten. Old me would rush to be available, to impress, to prove I was low maintenance. New me said, "Tonight's not good. I'm wiped. How about tomorrow?" He said, "Of course. Rest." Simple as that. Have you ever realized that the right people don't punish you for having limits? I don't know where that relationship will go. Maybe he's a season, maybe he'll be a chapter. But I do know this. I will never again ignore the small signs because I'm afraid of starting over. I built a whole new career from the ashes of a firing. I can rebuild from a bad date too. My mother, watching all of this, says, "You're softer now." At first, I bristled. Softer has never been a compliment in our world. It sounds like weaker, like less prepared. But she shook her head. Not weak, soft like you're not clenched all the time. You're not bracing for the next blow. She's right. I still work hard. I'm still the one who gets things done in a lot of rooms, but I don't do it for approval anymore. I do it because I value the work and I value me. And if a room doesn't value either, I leave. Now, when a manager in any clinic tries the old line, "We're a family here, we need team players who don't complain," I smile and say, "Families who ignore harm end up in my reports." It's amazing how quickly policies get followed when you say that nicely. Have you ever felt the quiet satisfaction of no longer needing to raise your voice to be heard because you've built systems that amplify you? Sometimes I still think about alternate timelines. The one where Marcus wasn't in that car. The one where I got into the actual capsy, went home and curled into a ball on my couch. The one where I never wrote in that notebook, never saved those emails, never had receipts when I needed them. In those timelines, I probably still would have survived, found another job, told myself it is what it is. Maybe I'd be watching someone else's story on YouTube, shaking my head saying, "Could never be me," while knowing deep down it already was. But I don't live in those timelines. I live in the one where I made a series of tiny, terrifying choices that stacked up into something I can be proud of. Choice to document, choice to speak up, choice to tell a stranger the truth, choice to walk into that conference room, choice to take a role that scared me because it stretched me. Have you ever given yourself credit not just for surviving the big things, but for every small yes and no that led you there? Here's the part nobody tells you. Justice doesn't erase the hurt. I still feel my chest tighten when I smell that particular brand of disinfectant they used at Eastside. I still have dreams where I'm being called into an office and handed a folder with my name on it. I still get angry when I think how many patients walked through those doors while the wrong people were in charge. But justice, real justice, not the movie kind, does something quieter. It puts your story back in your hands. It lets you say, "This happened to me, it was wrong, and I am still here telling it." It lets you build something from the mess that isn't just a scar, but a skill. Now when new hires sit in my trainings, fidgeting with their pens, eyes flicking up every time I say retaliation, I see myself in them, the younger me who thought being good at her job would protect her from bad leaders. I tell them, without naming names, about a woman who was fired for caring too loudly, and how that firing didn't stick because she had receipts, and she found someone willing to listen. I tell them about the text, "Everyone in my office, 1 hour, no exceptions." I tell them that sometimes the most powerful words you can say at work aren't "yes, I'll stay late," but "no, that's not safe," and "I need to document this." And I tell them, gently but clearly, that if the day ever comes when you're standing on a sidewalk with a cardboard box and your whole world shatters, you are not crazy. You are not alone. And somewhere in some office or some car or some tiny HR room, there might be one person who, if they tell the truth, will actually do something about it. Have you ever considered that you might already be that person for someone else? If you're listening to my story because you've been that woman or that man who gave everything to a place that spit you out, let me say this plainly. Your worth is not what they wrote in your file. Your character is not whatever words they put in the reason for termination box. Your future is not limited by the imagination of the person who handed you your last paycheck. And your voice? It might feel small, shaky. It might crack in the conference room. It might sob in the back seat of a stranger's car. But it is still yours. And if you choose to use it, even once, even quietly, you have no idea whose office, whose life, whose whole system it might change. In my case, it started with the wrong car.
It continued with the right sentence. Take me to my apartment. I need my notebook. And it lives on every time I look at a scared nurse, a frustrated receptionist, a single black woman trying not to lose her mind in a system that keeps asking her to shrink, and say, I believe you. Let's write this down. Because that's the real ending of this story. I thought I was just a fired employee looking for a ride home. Now I know I'm something else too. I'm proof that even when they think they've finished your story, you can pick up the pen, turn the page, and keep writing.